Thank you very much, first of all, for the nice talk. I think in the beginning you said that you could argue what's the difference between a letter and a number. And like recently I was talking with Deborah also about adding the mark of distinction to the Unicode. And then there was also the discussion like, what is that? So what is it for you, would be the question. Is it a number? Is it a symbol? Is it a math symbol? Is it a letter?
The symbol of distinction, I mean? That's one of the logical, there's a couple of logical devices in there that are part of written mathematical statements.
And then, like, the question referring to your talk was, you said you could argue what's the difference between a letter and a number, if I remember correctly, in the beginning? Yeah. Why can we, like, why should we, or why is that?
Oh dear, I don't know. I mean, the thing is that the certain digital type has to behave like numbers. That was going to be the point of my talk, because that's how you can do complex interpolations. Whether or not that object is then a number remains to be seen. It obeys arithmetic, but it's not that you can have an A with a particular construction and have a B with a different construction and add those, because that doesn't work. So it would only work in a very, very specific set of conditions. So letters are objects, and letters are mathematical objects, but whether they are numbers, I don't think they are really, by any stretch.
I do basic arithmetic on my fingers, and sometimes I get it wrong.
I'm very far away from my area of comfort, but when you get into the philosophical part, I think the fact that it is a very practical point to making objects do certain things. I think it's amazing that the Python language allows us to do this. The thing that Guido van Rossum built to actually foresee that, it might be really nice to have things that at some point sort of behave a little bit like numbers. Python support for Unicode, and very much also how Python has been integrated into the type world, and why we teach it at Type Media, is that we have to build our own tools. We have to make things that solve our problems, that let us build machines that support our thinking and draw the things that we need. And we cannot wait for font editor builders. We can certainly not wait for Adobe. So we have to be self-reliant. We have to come up with our own solutions for this. And I think your research into these logical systems, I think it's fantastic. So yes, and then build your own typesetting system for it. Build your own machines for it. You probably do. It reminded me of some Turing logic. Maybe you could probably do some computation in it. It looks a little bit like Lisp. Have you worked with Lisp? No. The Lisp processor, but very old language. Lots and lots and lots of nested parentheses. And anyway, I'm babbling.
So I'm struck by some connection between handwriting and what you're confronting there with. I know Michael was pointing to a lot of stuff about ligatures and little gestures, and I guess you're also you're confronting that in variable fonts. There's an atomization to typeface, right? That you condense everything into one character, but yeah, the characters are in context, right? And they get connected. I'm wondering, like, are we going to completely depart from handwriting or the traditions of handwriting, or do we still need to maintain all of those? I mean,
no, and we're still using printed books too. Yeah. That was my comment. We're still using printed books too, so these apocalyptic notions of like, no, an emoji is not a language. I don't know where this is going.
Yeah. Let's ask the audience. You must have Any questions and comments simmering in your minds as a result of this onslaught of ideas and concepts? Yes, we have one over there. One moment. Okay. Wait for the microphone, please. For posterity. Over in the front there.
No, it was just like because Eric, you talked about numerology of Unicode, and we talk about letters that are translated into numbers with the meaning and the form. And like I saw that the Unicode of the 0 is U plus 0030. And I was thinking if you had talk about this.
Please do not go into the numerology because it's all accidental, although I did know the two people who invented ASCII. But no, that's entirely accidental. Well, it's not entirely accidental, but it had to do with a lot of drawing stuff on napkins, apparently. And beer, of course, because...
I have one question for you. Like over 30 years from now, will Unicode still be the standard for our writing? Because I think it's roughly existing 30 years.
The expectation is that it's going to be there in 200 years. I mean, really. Okay, the only one thing that I can imagine is there's detritus in the standard things that are mistaken things, and it is conceivable that at some point somebody might clean that up and make a cleany code, right? And then there will be some sort of, because software will be different from it is now, there will be some sort of thing which would then take all of the legacy data and convert it into the clean, nice, fresh, new one. But ultimately, no. I mean, the work that we have done to analyze the scripts of India and, well, all of the continents, I don't know about the penguin scripts of Antarctica, of course. But all of that work has been done. I mean, when you know how the ref works in Devanagari, you know how the ref works in Devanagari. And so that, a lot of those solutions, there is no reason to change any of them. Will we still be using emoji in 30 years' time is a real question. But, yeah.
No, because I'm asking, isn't it that Unicode is very much based on the idea that a letter is static? And now that the letter become dynamic, an update is required for Unicode to facilitate this.
You have mistaken the difference between character and glyph.
I don't think so. But I think that I know, of course, the difference between a character and a glyph. But if a shape becomes dynamic, I think something very existential.
I was doing a radio interview, so I only saw the last half of your thing, and I apologize for not seeing any of yours. But it was a really good radio interview. He was playing with the letter R. There were any number of shapes of the letter R in his play, but it was one letter, and that's the character, and the rest of them were all glyphs, or instantiations of that character. There's no, that's it, that's all. I mean, in fact, you could say that the Anglicana W and the W they're both W's, right? Well, no, because they both have different histories. The Anglicana W comes from two Middle Welsh V's stuck together, and the W comes from two V's stuck together, and the V and the Middle Welsh one have different origins. So those are different characters, not because of what they're used for, because they're both used for a W. And that's identical. So that sound is one thing. The two letters are different things. And all of the different glyph variations that you might have. I mean, you might have the 4-stick W, or you might have the 3-stick W, or you might have the curvy W. Okay, but the W is the character, and the rest is all just glyphs.
Okay, the same question asked differently. Will there ever be a situation where we can write the square root the same way with a computer that we can write it now with a pen?
I don't know. That's a software issue, and I don't write code. In principle, yes. I mean, that's just a problem. And you could put in some sort of variable that would deal with the problem when you get extra things. And you know, I mean, if as I understand it, the LaTeX or whatever the hell that was pushing it more vertical, and you don't want it vertical. I mean, code could compensate for that in some mathematical way, and I would not be the person to ask to make it do that. You might.
I'm surprised this is a problem. Mathematicians having a problem with TeX would open up the TeX code and then fix it, right? I mean, how is that an issue?
Yeah, the problem is that the notation is different. Like if we write a square root, and we define by the length of the square root, this means by the shape of the character, what's the meaning of the character. And this we simulate in a very primitive way now with on the computer.
We would not call TeX simple. But
yeah, but it converts it into an image. Yeah. And so it's broken. I cannot, it's not text anymore. It's not Unicode anymore, which can be read by, which can be discovered by Google to understand what this square root is really about. And that's my point. So what I want to say is, will there ever be a moment where we can really encode the square root like we are writing it?
I think that's also difficult. If the problem is that the square root's length, that line over the whole formula, the length of that one has to be established. You can add another thing that you type in, like one of those accolades, and then fill in the form, and then end the accolade. And up till there, the line has to go. And when it actually appears on the screen, after the whole word, it's like automatic glyph substitution. Then those accolades disappear again, but they're still in the computer's mind. They're still in the code, but they disappear, and they're not there when you print it. Isn't that a very simple solution of that problem, or am I stupid?
That's not a Unicode.
For me, I understand it that when you make this part longer, the meaning of this one shape changes. It's not the same meaning anymore, because the meaning is defined by the form. So if the stroke gets longer, the meaning of the Unicode has to change.
Yeah, except that actually we encoded a square root and not all of the readings of the square root. And we encode the letter C and not all of the possible pronunciations of the letter C, which include ka, sa, cha, tsa, ja, ah, and 5 or 6 others. The musical notation and mathematical notation does not happen in plain text in Unicode. A higher level protocol is always invoked, and that's not going to change.
I think the question about the future of Unicode is not when will Unicode go away or be irrelevant. And one of my pieces of evidence is Twitter behavior around Unicode. I search Twitter occasionally with the string Unicode and regularly see people beseeching Unicode for some emoji or some character behavior that they want to see. So almost as if Unicode is this text deity, right, that governs the character order of the world. So I think the question about Unicode is, where will the physical temple be where people can go and make their prayers and beseech the God in person?
Palo Alto? Where is it? Ilke, wanted to ask you if you had any comments about this distinction. You spent a lot of time with Unicode symbols, but your work itself is much more expansive, working with the sound of language in a much more in a less restrained or less simplified way. Do you have any observations about these struggles that people in the type design in the type design department are going through here? Do you have some? I'm asking Ilke to ask you a question or to propose something. No? You want to pass her the mic?
No, I think it's always a big problem to get reality into systems. So, and I think the whole mankind is trying to get the real life into system you can deal with. So, and I think this is the same phenomenon. That's my perspective. Sorry. So, and I think it's an ongoing process to get more dimensions into 1 dimension, 2 dimension, and so on in systematical constructions.
What you see a lot these days, I mean, you know, what those shapes of smoke shapes reminded me of are actually early recordings. You know, actual movements of needles on various surfaces that can be played back. So that also it's a kind of analog form of recording.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So that leads me to a kind of reflection about how people also use, besides emojis, voice recordings in their messages. So there's also that element that.
Mm-hmm.
Smoke
recordings. Yeah.
Yeah, which allows for other dimensions of, but that's again not standardizable, right? There's still this. Yeah. Oh yeah, please. He's already first. Okay, you have to wait. Comment.
Yeah, I have one question or observation about Unicode. Judging from the talks and the questions today, it seems to me there's also a bit of a misunderstanding about what it can do and what it cannot do, in terms of it is encoding characters, but it's not specifically saying a lot about how they should be represented and specifically how typography should look like. So there's a lot of shaping that is actually done on software. Afterwards, it gets all the input from, you know, the characters when people are typing them in. So I think some of the examples here and also some of the, also misunderstanding maybe, is also about like, well, you can encode a lot of stuff in Unicode, but it doesn't specifically always say about how they really should work, how they should interact with other characters, for instance, when they are being typed. Is that something you can agree on?
Is it a bit like colonizing the moon? You know, like you want to carve up and you want to get your little square of Unicode or your coordinate of Unicode. That.
I'm talking about, for instance, index scripts. Index scripts have a very complicated way of shaping. And in Unicode, of course, it encodes a lot of index characters, but it still requires a lot of complicated post-processing to actually display really what it's supposed to do. And this is nothing that Unicode says anything about. That's not a problem, no. It's just a limitation.
Okay, please pass the mic up to the front. Where is?
That's because the INDIC model encodes the sounds, or at least the underlying. Yes, okay, in Hindi they drop a lot of the inherent vowels, that sort of thing. But I mean, there is something in there that is the basic structure of the language, which is going to be there in a recording as well as in something that's written down, but it might be written down in Braille, or, you know, there is different ways of encoding speech, and this is one of them. you could make, Tom has hundreds of photographs of Arabic, which is not running right to left and which is not doing the correct joining. But in some sense, if you were literate, you could work out what was there by going bit by bit. I mean, it's artificial and it's wrong, but the underlying encoding is actually still there. And that's true. You could have a large, complex Sanskrit conjunct and display it unconjoined with viramas after every one of them, and you could work out what the underlying basic text was. It was like my overcurl. If it doesn't fuse nicely with the base character, it doesn't matter as long as you can read it. Legibility is part of it. Now, of course, unformatted Arabic is not legible. Yes. Except in some, it's parsable.
Add
Please.
something? Yeah. Well, for Arabic, Unicode and Indic, Unicode doesn't deal with the shapes, but with the nominal values, and it leaves it to the software. And in this particular issue is that American software, by default, turns Arabic functionality off. So it can shape, but it doesn't shape. But there is another issue that that's the napkin and beer coaster metaphor. The whole Unicode initiative is a panic project. We are dealing with American military communications systems that have only a doomsday scenario for human language communication. It has 26 letters to send commands to missile batteries to fire the last nuclear rounds. And all of a sudden, at the end of the Cold War, the industry was able to exploit this for a completely different function, which is now becoming the basis for all civilization. But there is never has there been a plan to anticipate on this. And as a result, in the panic, they took the only available metaphor for language information that existed, global language technology, 15th century typography. That was the only available technology. What we have now is a concept Unicode that doesn't claim to be able to do anything. That's, I think, somewhere in the basic tenets of the Unicode consortium. It actually declares that you cannot expect anything from it. Probably they were advised by lawyers. But the thing is, will Unicode have a future? Yes, of course, but it will probably become what it really is, just a typographical format. What passed in this afternoon or this morning was the International Phonetical Alphabet, and then a picture of the throat and pictures of clouds. Now the clouds are actually visualizations of what we call acoustic phonetics. You speak and you can film speaking, adding cigarette smoke. But you also have articulatory. I have difficulty to articulate that. You have also articulatory phonetics, which simply describes from your throat to your lips what happens to interfere with the airflow out of your mouth. That can be described in a simple series of zeros and ones. And that is the future of language information, because any linguist can tell you language is not script, it's speech. And the common denominator between everything we do in language is spoken. And it happens if you look at Serbo-Croato-Bosnian in Yugoslavia, it's one and the same language. It occurs in 3 scripts. There is a Roman Catholic script for it, there is Byzantine Greek script for it, and there is Muslim script for it. If you search something in any of these scripts, you will only get a Muslim answer if you happen to be searching in Arabic script. You only get a Catholic answer if you search in Latin script, and you only get a Greek, a Greek Byzantine answer, or Orthodox answer if you search in Cyrillic script. The same happens in India. You have one language, Hindustani, which broke up in Urdu and Hindi. One writes in Nagari script, the other writes in Muslim script. If you describe their speech in linguistic format, you end up with exactly the same. If you search Arabic, you will never catch the Arabic that was produced by those Arabs who are not Muslims, but are very important in Middle Eastern culture, the Jews and the Christians, because those write in Hebrew script and in a Syriac script. And as a result, what you get is that the choice the course for typography as a format for language builds in religious, political, regional bias that locks information into boxes that don't belong there. But that's
yes,
the future.
Tom. But I mean, in principle, hi, Deborah.
Deborah, can you just test your sound? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you can interrupt any time.
Okay.
I mean, Tom, the Cyrillic and Latin and Arabic are different scripts, but it is not inconceivable to imagine that if you were doing some sort of search 100 years from now, you would get data that was in all of them because you would have some spider who would be able to, via an external language database, would be able to find the word Malaka in all three of the scripts and that sort of thing. So, yeah. Good.
So perhaps if somebody from the audience has a question for Deborah.
Yeah, I have a question for Skype. I was interested in decision making on the Unicode, what will be inside Unicode and not, and I always thought it was decided by the Unicode Consortium, but apparently today I learned there's also the ISO committee. That's correct?
International Standards Organization.
Yes? Yeah. Is that correct? Like there are two committees deciding on what will be inside the Unicode, right?
Deborah, did you hear the question?
What was he was asking what were the two groups that approve characters for Unicode?
Yeah, that was
The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, and the Unicode Consortium.
They both have to agree on something before something is accepted to the Unicode, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then my next question would be then, like, what role how is money involved in here? What aspects, financial aspects are there?
What's the business angle?
You cannot buy a character.
Bas's question was, so how does money factor into the decision-making process from your experience?
Well, there are different angles, but I mean, some companies, of course, want people with their cell phones. They want to like expand into new markets. So there's been a push to say get phones into Africa so people can be able to write in their native scripts there. Okay, that's not a very good answer. Michael, how about you jump in here?
Yeah, it's always. I mean, there's no. Sometimes there's a weird, Debbie, earlier in my talk, I talked about the troll, which of course is on the ballot now and could be in the next edition of 10646, but apparently the US national body has asked for it to be removed because it's going to be in Unicode 14 and not in Unicode 13, and they want it removed evidently so that there isn't sudden pressure for the phone manufacturers to support the troll before the phone manufacturers are ready to do so. I'm guessing that's I think they say that it's a question of synchronization, but I mean, we have been unsynchronized for some months in one direction or the other before. I'm guessing that would be a financial reason for saying, please don't encode this now because it would put a burden. I mean, emoji design and implementation doesn't come for free in truth. But there's no system where it's like somebody, I mean, if you have enough money, you can buy a seat and a vote in the Unicode Consortium. But if you have enough money, your country can buy a seat in ISO, right? I mean, it's not the same kind of money, and it's not, and I don't know what ISO fees are, I have no idea, and do not ask me. But it's not as though anybody comes forward and says, here I have a bunch of money, so can I please have this set of script or characters? Because neither committee would be interested in that. That's just not the way that the cooperation works. Sometimes the two committees don't agree, and usually when that happens, the unagreed thing is pushed on to the next stage so that we can enjoy more years of argument.
It's a difference between integration and implementation, right? Because like you can have your Unicode, your thing integrated, you can have your character integrated into Unicode. It doesn't mean that any of the big hardware companies are going to implement that character.
I've encoded many, many characters which haven't been implemented by anybody, I think. The ones that there's pressure to implement and are the emoji, because people have certain very, very specific expectations about that. And currently, I don't like it, but it's a truth. That drives a lot of what happens, for good or for ill. You know, a lot of it just grew exponentially, and I mean, you get all these people petitioning for this and that and stuff. And I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's a bad. I would like to see an end to that, because it's endless otherwise, and it prevents us from actually spending time perfecting the actual writing systems of the world, however much fun they are. On the other hand, if they would add the dinosaurs, I would be okay with it.
Is it on? Yeah. My question, I think, is directed to Akeem. And I'm quite new to this, so it might be uninformed, I guess. But so you were speaking about like looking at letters as forms and not just things kept next to each other in a way. If like looking at the form of a mark, right? And as you get into design, you notice kerning. And like how different letters like V and A have a bad kerning pair. And I was wondering if, at some point it would be possible to like type out something and the form of the letter would be taken into consideration and not the boxes that they are in. And it would automatically kind of make the kerning optical.
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly, but what is perhaps important to add to the talk is that when I visited the conference in Liverpool and I talked to the people, I was surprised that everybody's struggling around to typeset those books with those formulas. So if you look at the book outside, you will see that it's very difficult to typeset. Even one person told me that he had to sell his car to ask a designer to produce all those formulas. And this made me curious. And that was like what was the talk about, was to figure out like why is that so complex and why is there a solution for that? And is there a solution within, like, is there a Unicode-based solution, or is that also showing a problem of the Unicode? So in that way, it's a very pragmatic reason why I was interested in that. Just to see how we actually type and how we can produce something as in the book.
I wanted to react to the question about the decision-making process. It's determined by people, by members by full members of the Unicode consortium with a voting right, and these are a couple of companies and the Sultanate of Oman. And I happen to be a member of the UTC on behalf of the Sultanate of Oman, so I have the voting right. The problem is that you also need to have a budget. They meet 4 to 5 times a year. I had a budget that covered 2 years. I've been traveling like an idiot up and down between Muscat and Silicon Valley. I have no budget now, but that is the only country whose civilization is concerned by what's happening there that has a voting right. And I'm not using it at the moment. But so in the end, you have a very small group of people who make these decisions, because Michael has been prolific in making proposals, but he cannot vote for his own proposals, if I'm right.
In ISO I can, but not at the UTC. No, I don't have a vote at the UTC. I represent Ireland in ISO, and I have a vote there.
Hello? I have a question following the question from Bas. And the question is for Michael or Deborah. If I want to influence the decision if there is the next dinosaur going into Unicode or not, is it better to become part of Unicode, to become a full member, or would it be better to go into ISO, to be, let's say, the national standard, the national body, let's say, for the Netherlands? What would happen if Unicode says okay for a dinosaur, and ISO, or a national standard body from the Netherlands, would say no to a dinosaur?
It's more likely to go the other way, because you see the reason the reason that there would be pushback against the dinosaurs, that there's too many dinosaurs. I've asked for 12 rather than 2, and that would be expensive to implement because companies have to spend money with designers to make colorful things and then put them into the phones, right? So, I mean, but the answer is both. If you can afford the fees and can sit and can travel to Unicode, you know, I mean, honestly, when I work I'm in the room with a lot of these people, we get a lot of work done. It's when we can't meet, but we can't meet because there's no funding for it. On the other hand, national body ISO participation has become less because some countries, you know, Sweden got Finland got a bunch of the characters they used for Finnish linguistics, okay? And they said, well, we don't need anything more, so we're not going to go any longer, because it costs money to go to those meetings as well. It doesn't necessarily cost money to vote in ISO, but what we do have is Germany, the Netherlands, and France, for instance, are not participating on the ISO side, and so there are fewer voices around the table. And please, everyone, all of those participate in the standards bodies. They just don't participate in the subcommittee and the working group that are affected. Nothing prevents that from happening, but currently there just isn't anybody who's doing it. And that's not so good. I mean, the more voices there are around all of the tables, and the more that the two committees cooperate together, the better it is. Currently, it's kind of us versus them a lot of times, although we all try to be nice to each other.
Deborah, do you have any other observations on that choice that Johannes was bringing up, whether it's better to be a member of the Unicode consortium or to be a member of the ISO to get your character integrated?
Well, I kind of agree with Michael to be a member of both. For the technical side, being on the UTC, the Unicode Technical Committee, being a member there would be probably stronger, better. And I have a response to something Tom Milo said. There are some voting members who are not companies or Oman, and that is India and Tamil Nadu. So they're not full members. They're institutional members like I am, UC Berkeley. So there are a few others besides big international companies.
But you have to be a full member. That's the point. You have to be a full member, and it costs $22,000 a year.
Yeah, well, institutional members have full votes too.
But for free?
No, 10,000, I think.
I'll downgrade Oman to an institution.
We have another question over here?
Thinking of Unicodes, I'm trying to summarize it in my head. And could you consider it the registered use of variation? The skin of an orange is peeled. because there are numerous variations. You can peel the skin of an orange. You can do it in bits. You can do it in one go. But there are there's only a certain possibilities, because just like spoken language, certain sounds we cannot make. So there's like physical obstruction to peel an orange in a certain way too. So as a metaphor, the registered use of it, because there is more easy ways. Therefore, we use a certain letter because it has to be efficiently needs the ability to be written quickly or recognizably universally.
Okay, but that's a question about writing systems, not really about Unicode, because Unicode is a coordination system. One more question? No. We've got to spread it around.
I have an Unicode unrelated question, as maybe it's nice to also take a break. From the technical side, I actually want to ask Inka about her work, because I see also the way of how you work is a way, like a language of seeing things, and because I'm also an artist myself working with language, and I'm quite curious to hear how you kind of freely organize your material, but also you do have a system of seeing things, like your own language of visual work. And I wonder, like, in terms of like collecting material and conceptualizing on them, and do you have a sort of a systematic way of working, or it's more based on instinct and more freestyle of visual language?
In the end, it's both, I think. So I try to observe very exactly. So I'm not a scientist. I'm free in this way. So, and in the end, I try to get a real picture, so an independent picture. So I think it's both of it has both aspects. So, but I think if you try to observe something in the surrounding very exactly, as an artist, for example, you can get a very exact feeling about something. So, like an instinct, maybe. That's what I'm trying, but it's I don't get it every time. So, but I try to describe things in a visual way. But I hopefully the images are free in the end. It's not an kind of didactic thing. So.
I think it's very nice to have you also in the conversation in this very. For me, also sometimes it's very graphical and very scientific, and I think it's nice to have the free style of thinking and sampling in your own language. Yeah, for me, it's very nice to see your work in this conference. Yeah,
it's a very personal point of view. So it's not the goal to have something true or something else. So it's a very personal point of view.
I would like to add something about the position of power or influence, Unicode versus ISO. Now, ISO was by default the authority for this. And in the 1980s, they worked on a comprehensive scheme to get all the languages covered. Out of politeness, they made it so big, 32 bits, that if you compare it with trucks on the German Autobahn system, they developed a universal truck of 32 meters tall in a system with bridges with 4 meters high. In the early internet, only 8-bit bytes could pass through the web. What Unicode accomplished was to convince the Chinese, the Korean, and the Japanese communities that basically they share the same character set, and therefore they could fold together all these tens of thousands of characters into one system and stay under 65,000, and as a result, it could be covered by an 8-bit character, or sorry, a 16-bit character, which is the original format of Unicode. Then UTF-8 was used as a name that folds it into the format that gets under the Autobahn bridges. By doing this, they defeated ISO hands down. ISO was a political organization. Unicode was completely on the ball and technical. Now we are in a situation, so many years later, that the bridges are tall and you can have 32-bit bytes, tall characters, and Unicode is actually using them. But the clue is that computer typography still resides in an operating system. And if you control the computer typography, you control everything. Who controls computer typography? Apple, Adobe, Microsoft and Google. These are in the Unicode consortium. They call the shots. They come with arguments. We can have no more than 60 emojis because it costs us too much money. And that's simply a technical construction of the same quality as an Autobahn system with 2-meter tall bridges.
Do you have any observations or anything you'd like to share with us here in The Hague, having heard these comments?
Oh, from Tom or just in general?
In general.
No. Continue talking.
Sorry. Does it work? Yeah. Sorry, I don't have actually really a question, and I'm sorry about that. But this problem of the accuracy of encoding of our writing systems and languages made me think about this paradox of the map in Lewis Carroll. Sylvia and Bruno, do you know this story? Can I take 1 minute to say it? This is a conversation, and one guy said, "That's another thing we have learned from your nation, map making, but we've carried it much further than you. What do you consider the largest map that will be really useful?" And the guy responded, "About 6 inches to the mile." "Only 6 inches?" exclaimed Mynheer. "We very soon got to 6 yards to the mile, then we tried 100 yards to the mile, and then came the grandest idea of all. We actually made a map of the country on the scale of a mile to the mile." Have you used it much?" I inquired. "It has never been spread out yet," said Mynheer. "The farmers objected. They say it would cover the whole country and shut out the sunlight. So we now use the country itself as its own map, and I assure you it does nearly as well." So it was a kind of metaphor of we can be perfectly accurate to transcribe our voice and all this complexity, and we have to be synthetic sometime. It was just a story to conclude. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so I have a question to Eric. So you talked about variable fonts, right? So instead of saying we have a Times New Roman where we have a bold and a semi-bold, we use like a calculation where we can say, okay, my font is now bold, but just I put in a different number, so it's just a bit less bold than bold. So I think it would be nice for designers to have this kind of freedom, but would that still work with OpenType, or would that mean that you need a new standard? Like we have first had TrueType, then you had OpenType where you can also choose like the ligatures and the kerning. Would this be like a new standard that we need to introduce in the whole world?
That's easy. It's an extension to the OpenType specification, I think 1.8. And it adds a couple of tables that define how the variations are expressed for each glyph and the metrics and some other things. So yes, it is an extension to an existing format. Yep.
That was it. Just as a response to Thomas' story there, I think that it's not a question of finding a technical system that is equivalent to reality. That, of course, doesn't make sense. But the question is, what is at stake with simplification? So what things get lost and what choices are made, right? So I think unless Deborah has some closing remarks to make to help guide us on our way into the evening here in in The Hague, we're going to close up. Would you grace us with a few closing remarks, Deborah, that you're here?
Well, I'm sorry to have missed this event. I understand it was very interesting. Michael texted me to let me know. It's been an interesting day. I'm sorry to have missed it, but if anyone has any questions, they can email me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions they may have.
Okay, that's very generous. So we're going to spread your email to... All right, well, with that, I'd like to have a warm applause for Deborah and for our panel.